Hey, welcome back to the Dr. Amber Show. So, one name we're going to talk about today, Lindsay Clancy. And you all know I'm a psychologist, so I will not be giving you legal expertise about this case, but I do want us to talk about it just from a mental health standpoint and as a psychologist and just my thoughts. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't really hear anything about Lindsay Clancy or this case until I was away on vacation last week. I was relaxing with my husband, and we had on CNN, something we rarely do. And I just started to hear more and more and more about this case, which also aligned up with my Instagram social media algorithm. I started to see more people mention this name, Lindsay Clancy, and something about her mental health and her being on trial. And that didn't get me to become interested until, again, I was on vacation and started to learn more. So I took a deep dive and found myself fascinated and wanting to better understand her, but then also wanting to talk with you all about it too. So today I want to just share my thoughts, and maybe we can kind of talk through how to make sense of this and where we go from here. So what you can expect from today's episode is really a deep dive from a psychological perspective about how to understand what you might be seeing or learning about Lindsay Clancy and her case, her family. Next week on the Dr. Amber Show, we'll go deeper into better understanding maternal mental health. And so we'll understand terms like postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, postpartum psychosis. We'll learn a little bit more about intention, desires, intrusive thoughts. We'll talk a lot more in depth about that next week. But today, let's talk about Lindsay Clancy. And I've got my notes here, so I want to kind of just kind of talk out loud and read through it. But I think it makes a lot of sense that this case has become so big. I have some other thoughts about that too, because there's also someone by the name of Lartisha Sanders, who a very similar situation happened 1 year prior. Lartisha, however, was convicted of first-degree murder. However, because of how big this situation with Lindsay Clancy is, I believe that she is now being awarded a new trial, because what happened was the very same judge that is seeing this case for Lindsay Clancy also saw the case for Lartisha Sanders. Lartisha is a Black woman. Refused to hear any of her mental health records. Interesting, right? So again, I paused there and I wanted to insert that because I just said I think it makes a lot of sense why this case is getting so much attention. Anytime something happens to young children, something so devastating, something that is really feels unimaginable, of course that's going to receive attention, but we cannot go forward and not acknowledge the glaring difference here. Lindsay Clancy is a white woman. She's receiving a lot of compassion, a lot of grace. I look forward to Lartisha Sanders receiving that same amount of grace and compassion as we now learn more about her case in the future. All right, so let's get back to Lindsay Clancy. It makes a lot of sense why we're seeing so much about this, but let's talk through it a little bit. And there are a few things that really caught my eye and some things that I know that is happening in the courtroom right now. Also, I want to be mindful of the fact that this case is moving fast. At the time that you are watching this, it's probably after August 24th. I am recording this on August 17th. So if there are details or information missing specifically about this case from this episode, it's just because time moves so fast and I can't keep up. Okay, so one of the things that I know that the prosecution is really focused on is just this drive time search. And so one thing that I learned was that they are saying Lindsay Clancy intentionally sent her husband out, and before sending him out, prior to her harming the children, she looked up the route that she was going to have him go to pick up medication, to pick up dinner. Her doing that, again, from the prosecution standpoint, means that she intentionally was trying to curate this time that she would have to do what she needed to do intentionally to harm the children. However, of course, the defense has another perspective about that, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit. But it made me start to think about, wow, there's so many different ways that we can look at this. There's so many ways that we can view this. There's also something that her husband Patrick mentioned in the courtroom, saying that on that day, she was having a good day, right? He believed that her mental health had been improving, and we'll go a little bit more deeper into the details soon, but she sought out a lot of mental health support for the past year prior to the children being harmed, and he thought things were getting better. Things were looking up. She had a great day. So it felt really confusing for him that she could do something so devastating to the children in the same day, in the same week that he thought things were looking up. So that leads to these questions. What does it mean for someone to be improving with regard to their mental health? What does it mean for symptoms to fluctuate? Or is our perception of how we think someone's doing, is it even accurate? Especially when it comes to mothers and their mental health. There was a lot of talk about her functioning really well. She was able to cook dinners and make the lunches and go to the doctor's appointments. And I saw a clip when I was watching the news of her being very hands-on with the children when they visited a museum. For Patrick, her ex-husband, and other people who are seeing that, they're maybe thinking, oh, so she was doing fine. So how could something like this happen? And again, today I'm wondering if we maybe need to expand our ideas and our thoughts about, well, what is fine? And are our perceptions of how someone's doing really in line with what's actually happening? Maybe not. I think there's also this other thing that I started to notice, especially as I got deeper into the case and learning more, and then starting to understand more of the dialogue that I'm seeing on the social media and the internet. It's really hard for people to have or find compassion for someone who harms children, takes the life of children, because that feels so big, that feels so unimaginable, that brings up feelings that just are just unspeakable. But I'm wondering if it's possible for us to do both. Can we have compassion for someone, Lindsay Clancy, who ended the life of her children, while also still holding immense grief and compassion for the children and the lives that were lost? It feels like we're possibly capable of that. So these were all the things that started to come to my mind, all the questions that I started to have about this case. And I'm wondering what you're thinking and what's coming to mind for you as well. Put that in the chat, in the comments. I would love to know. But let's actually run down the details. I want us to get on the same page about what we actually know. Again, I'm going to check my notes because there's a lot of notes I had to prepare for this episode because, again, this case is so huge. So we're talking about Lindsay Clancy. She was a labor and delivery nurse. Prior to having her third child, she never returned back to work after having her third child. They lived in Massachusetts. She was married to Patrick Clancy. They had 3 children. Cora was 5. Dawson was 3, and then Callan was 8 months old. Callan was born in May of 2022. What we know is that during the months after Callan was born, that is when Lindsay started to experience a lot of psychiatric distress, psychological difficulty. There is a very detailed and extensive record of Lindsay seeking out mental health support in the months following Callan's birth. Some of the things that we know she experienced: anxiety and depressive symptoms. She had significant difficulty with sleeping. She reported intrusive thoughts and thoughts that felt disturbing to her. She discussed thoughts of wanting to harm herself, and she contacted multiple mental health providers. She was prescribed multiple medication prescriptions, and there also were multiple medication changes as they were working to better understand what was really going on and what might be useful for her. Lindsay also voluntarily went into a psychiatric hospital in January of 2023, which is the same month that this occurred. After being discharged from the hospital, she continued outpatient treatment. I believe she also experienced an intensive outpatient program. There also was a lot of support. Extended family came. They knew what was going on. They came to stay and help support while she was in and out of treatment. So this isn't someone who was struggling and fell through the cracks. This isn't someone that like no one knew what was going on. There were many providers involved. There was family to support. And still something really big happened. So again, just to catch you all up, just in case you're not aware, the big event occurred January 24th, 2023. According to court documentation and records, the day appeared normal. They have reported via the things that I've read about this case, Cora, the oldest daughter, had a doctor's appointment that day, and Lindsay went with her. Lindsay had a good day where she was interacting with the children. She sent photos and messages to family members as normal. Her ex-husband, Patrick, reported that she was, seemed to be improving. He did not have any concerns about her behaviors that day. Once they got to the evening, Lindsay asked Patrick to pick up medication for the children and then also recommended that they do takeout for dinner. She coordinated the information just with regard to where to go to pick up the medication and then also where to go to get the dinner. Again, that account of the driving record, that is really huge for the prosecution and the defense teams around her being very intentional about the drive time and checking the drive time. When Patrick left to go get the medication and the dinner, Lindsay then strangled the 3 children in the basement, and she then proceeded to injure herself and then jump from the 2nd-story window in an attempt to take her life as well. Lindsay survived, but she had a serious spinal injury that has left her paralyzed, and the children are no longer with us. I'm going to take a deep breath because that, and I encourage you all to do that as well because, I think sometimes we undermine and dismiss how hard it is to hear very difficult details and accounts of these things. And we are constantly bombarded on social media and the internet and on the news about very hard things. This is a lot. And if it's a lot for me to simply read it from online sources, I can only imagine how difficult it is for this family. What we also learned after this event, Lindsay reported experiencing a male voice telling her that she needed to take the lives of the children. And so now there's this argument about whether she was actually experiencing postpartum psychosis or whether this was a highly planned, intentional act to take the life of her children. Oh my goodness. My gosh. So there's a few things that really, as a psychologist, watching this on the news, someone who is not an attorney, not a lawyer, not in the legal field, I have enough understanding to know what the job is of the prosecution, what the job is of the defense. But it's so fascinating how, depending on what side you're on, you have to take a sequence of events. You have to take a behavior and you have to make a story about it to make sense of it. And essentially, this is what is happening. We are all trying to make sense of a handful of behaviors that were demonstrated by Lindsay Clancy that ended in the loss of life of her children. And one thing that I know about human behavior as a psychologist is that we can observe a behavior, but behavior does not always infer meaning. Behavior doesn't always indicate motivation, intention, meaning. Meaning is often drawn from our own perception of what is happening, our own personal unique understanding, or the story that we've been told. So for example, and we talk about things like this on the show all the time. Let's say there's a situation where, you're a parent and your child slams the door, right? The behavior is they slam the door. But what is the narrative or the story that is being told to you by you about that behavior? Is it that, oh, they slammed the door, they're being disrespectful? Or is it that, oh, maybe the wind kind of pushed it a bit and they lost control of the door, everything's fine? It could be either or, right? Or let's imagine you're talking and your partner is ignoring you. They are not responding. The behavior is the lack of response from your partner. But what does it mean? Does it mean, oh, they don't care about me, this is a terrible relationship? Or does it mean, oh, they maybe didn't hear me, maybe they're preoccupied and it has nothing to do with me? Same behavior, different meaning. We see this happen in courtrooms and with cases, legal cases, all the time. I'm wondering about, again, that this idea of Lindsay Clancy very meticulously coordinating this drive time, her figuring out exactly how long her ex-husband was going to be away so that she knew exactly how much time she had. If things were different and Patrick was able to return home with the medication, with the dinner, and everyone was able to eat dinner, go to bed, and be happy, would we interpret her looking at the drive time as something negative? Probably not. But because this thing happened, now we are looking at it a little bit different. And that introduces the psychological concept of hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is essentially our tendency to look at a situation or a behavior and add a different type of meaning to it, or assume the predictability was more likely than not because we know the outcome. It's easier to look back at something and say, of course. Hindsight bias is always dependent upon, well, what was the outcome? What happened? And I see some of this playing out here. Because again, let's stick with this example of Lindsay checking how long it would take Patrick to pick up the medication, pick up the dinner, get back home. If any other mother did that on any other normal day, and then everything was fine after, we probably wouldn't look at that behavior and assume that it was malicious or negative in any way. However, because of what happened after, what the outcome was, we're looking at that behavior in a much different way. And we're saying, of course, something's there. When really, this behavior could have been neutral. Who knows? We don't know. And this is why cases like this can be so difficult. There's a lot of nuance and complexities that we may never have the answers to. And we have to be able to hold the complexity and the nuance of both things at the same time. Let's shift a bit to another assumption or question that is being highlighted very heavily in the details of this case. And it is the idea that, according to Patrick, her ex-husband, Lindsay was having a good day. She was functioning well. She was able to attend the doctor's appointments. She was able to make the lunches. She was able to be with the children, and there was nothing that he saw that gave any indication that she could not be with the children alone. It brings up this question of, if she was functioning normally, could it be possible that she was psychotic or severely ill? And I think that is one of the questions that is being heavily deliberated and contemplated in this case. Is it possible for her to have experienced psychosis if in the moments leading up to it, she was functioning well? I think this idea brings up this, again, this cultural belief or this assumption of what we think mental illness looks like, or what we think severe mental illness manifests as. And as a psychologist, let me tell you, sometimes we can't see it. You can't see it just by looking at a person. And also, let me tell you this, just because someone is functioning well does not mean that they are doing well. As someone who works with mothers and parents all the time, there is something about parents and mothers and caregivers who find it. They find the ability to function and care for their children, their loved ones, despite being so exhausted, so fatigued, so unwell themselves. So it leads us to maybe start to speculate. And again, as a psychologist, I know this very well. Functioning doesn't always give us all the information we need to know about how well someone is doing psychiatrically. Maybe it wasn't enough to assume that because she was able to attend the doctor's appointment that day, and she was able to make the lunches, and she was able to... I don't know if that's enough to assume that she was doing well or she was getting better. As a psychologist, I know that sometimes severe mental health implications or things like psychosis can happen pretty quickly. It can happen very acutely. It can appear very episodically when you least expect it. So no, I don't think it's enough to say, well, hours before she was okay. Again, in our next episode next week, we'll go deeper specifically with regard to maternal mental health. And so if you're interested in that, come back next week, because we'll talk a lot more extensively about postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, postpartum psychosis, intrusive thoughts, intention, plan, desire, and what that all means for maternal wellness. But until then, we can pretty definitively say that sometimes functioning is not the same thing as wellness. Functioning is not always the same thing as someone doing well. Dysfunction often can be very invisible. I think one of the biggest things I noticed about this case, the conversation around it, is just the dichotomies that come up and are present and that we are having to really analyze and face. Again, in our society, it's really hard for people to hold two things at one time, especially when those two things feel so contradicting. But with this case, with Lindsay, similarly with LaTarsha Sanders' case, there are other cases similar to this where we are being asked to hold nuance and complexity. So for instance, we are being asked whether it's possible for a mother to deeply love her children and also take their lives. We are being asked whether it is possible for someone to be deeply struggling psychologically and psychiatrically and still be able to function and perform for the family. We are being presented with the reality that someone can seek out help and the help and the intervention still not be enough. We are being confronted with the idea that things can be getting better and seemingly improving, and something very tragic could still happen. Our minds always want the black and the white. Our minds wants the one or the two. We rarely want both. We want to live in the world of the or, but I think this case is forcing us to realize that sometimes we're going to have to mix in some and. Maybe it's both. And there are a lot of concepts and experiences with regard to psychology and human behavior that really force us to understand that sometimes it is and both. I don't know if we can look at Lindsay Clancy in this case and say that, it's either she's psychotic or she's calculating. Could it be both? Maybe. She's either loving or she's a murderer. Or maybe there's a mix there. Either she was completely sick or she's fully responsible. There's likely some overlap. Is she a victim or a perpetrator? I see an argument for both. This case is forcing us to tolerate that complexity. And y'all know online, y'all don't like complexity. Y'all don't like nuance. But we have to. We have to hold it. We have to take it in order to understand cases like this. So with that being said, I'm so curious to hear what you all think and what this case brings up for you. Again, I'm really looking forward to LaTarsha Sanders' new trial so that we also can come back and better understand her trial and her life as well. But I'm so glad I was able to have this moment and to go a little bit deeper with understanding Lindsay Clancy in this case and how to hold the complexity and the nuance here. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone, or if in your friend groups, your group chats, y'all are talking about this episode, share this episode with them just to add another layer, another perspective. But again, come back next week. Next week, we're going to go deeper and talk a little bit more about postpartum mental health, maternal health, and the implications there. Okay, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.